Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid Nation, formerly AC55ID.com. Acid Nation is the fastest growing electronic music marketplace. It is a direct-to-consumer platform. So if you're a label or an artist looking to sell direct to your fans, or if you're a music fan yourself looking to support your favorite artists or labels, well, this is a great place for you to be spending your time. What is the difference between Acid Nation and other D2C platforms? Well, for example, they have a pressing plant. They can fulfill vinyl orders on demand, straight from fans, and ship directly back to fans. That's pretty amazing. They have a fulfillment service too. So like I said, they can do all of that stuff for you. You don't have to lift a finger. And they also have free storage for all your stock. Again, pretty incredible. Streaming on the platform is 1 cent per stream. That is the payback rate. The mythical 1 cent per stream is reality on Acid Nation. And also they're supporting Music Not Diving, which is another great thing to say about them, really, isn't it? So I suggest you head over to acidnation.com and check them out.
The biggest enemy of Silicon Valley is young teenage girls, because they are the one thing on the planet that the people of Silicon Valley do not understand and will never understand.
Right, okay.
And what they think is cool is completely unfathomable to the people of Silicon Valley. They just don't get it.
Okay.
It's why there's such a sort of antipathy towards Taylor Swift and things like that. They just don't like that anyone can have that much sway in a cultural and artistic sense.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, this week we're getting right under the bonnet, right under the hood of the music industry. Darren Hemmings is an expert in music marketing. He is the founder and the guy who runs Motive Unknown, which is a creative agency dedicated to selling music, to working with labels and working with artists to deliver marketing campaigns to them, basically for them to break through and really connect with what they're doing. Darren's previously been on the show when we were an audio-only podcast called Not a Diving Podcast. He made an appearance. We had a really interesting chat about basically just the way the whole thing works, the changes in the industry, the challenges, and all of that stuff. He also writes an extremely good Substack called Network Notes. There's a link in the show notes to check that out. And he's just a guy who knows basically everything there is to know about all of this stuff. So an amazing person to talk to. Without further delay, let's head over to the studio and check out my conversation with Darren Hemmings.
Brought to you by acidnation.com.
Darren Hemmings, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, mate. Good to be here. I've come dressed appropriately.
I mean, appropriate for what is the question.
Yeah, I was remarking before we just started that I think I've come dressed as a domestic terrorist.
It's not that kind of show.
I know. I've come dressed like a man for war, but okay. It's all good.
Why don't you just briefly introduce yourself to the audience? You have been on the show before, obviously, but when we were previously a audio-only show.
Yeah.
So who are you, Darren, and why are you here?
So I run a company called Motive Unknown. It's a marketing company. It's been around for about 14 years. We work almost exclusively in the independent sector. We have clients like Warp, Ninja Tune, but we also work with Domino, Dirty Hit. You know, we work with management companies as well. So we work with people like Chase and Status. We just finished working with AJ Tracy. So we get around. So that's one half of the business. And then the other half is a music tech division that works a lot with essentially audio production companies. So people like Minimal Audio and Lunacy and all those kinds of things. You know, they're essentially making plugins for producers. So we do that. And I suppose in both cases, we're there to, I mean, you know, the risk of being crashed, just help these people make more money, right? Help them strategize and reach more people, but do it in a way that's not vulgar. You know, we kind of stand for trying to do things properly.
So is it mostly on the strategy side, or do you do sort of roll out and delivery too?
Yeah, I mean, we're handling the whole, you know, the execution of marketing campaigns in conjunction with the teams. So sometimes it's a massive team and we're just plugging in as a smaller part of that. Sometimes, you know, I work with Run the Jewels, and, you know, when we did the Run the Jewels 3 record, there's basically about 6 of us. And that was the team, really. It was sort of that, and just, you know, overseeing every part of how the campaign would unfold. So it varies depending on what the needs of the client is, but it's, you know, it gets pretty involved, and that's sort of, it's how we like it, is to be as involved as we can be in terms of what's happening and where that pans out. So yeah, it's good. It's, you know, pressure, but good.
It has been remarked on the show many times perhaps hypothesized, I'm not sure how true this is, maybe you can tell me, that the methods for releasing a record seem to change almost year by year or month by month almost. Is that your experience of it? I mean, to what extent is that an accurate characterization?
I don't think they've changed. I think people, the music industry is quite lazy, so it can be a bit guilty of sort of ambulance chasing. So if someone does something really smart, like I saw the other day that Major Lazer had teased a new track by apparently sort of dropping iPod Nanos around East London for people to find the track on. I mean, a cynic would say the reality is it's a social media clip showing people finding these things, and it's probably just shot down a street or whatever, you know, but I'm a very cynical man. But you know, people are then, it's interesting that the chat that then produces across, everybody's been like, oh, well, maybe we should, you know, do something like that. And I think it's a bit like that with releasing records in general. You know, people see other methods that people have used and they go, oh, maybe we should try that. But, you know, I've kind of always said that I think the principles of selling something to somebody have never changed, you know. And so some of the mechanisms shift a bit, but I don't, you know, I think underneath all of this is pretty simple. You have to connect with fans meaningfully and give them a reason to want to take time to pay attention to your music, because we're now in an attention economy, but ultimately invest money into you by, you know, could be buying a physical version of the album, could be spending money on tickets, could just be streaming it a lot. You know, there's all these ways that people can transact with you as an artist, you know, for what you do. But I don't think at the heart of it, the actual core principles have changed at all. It's like I've got something to sell and I need to sell it to people, so I've got to connect with them in order to do that. Right.
So I guess like, yeah, sort of short-term tactics maybe have the impression that they're changing, but actually...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of trend chasing where people go, oh, you know, now we need to do this. And it's something that I get very frustrated by. I mean, you see it on a lesser level on social media. You know, I remember when Facebook prioritized video over photos.
Right, yeah.
And suddenly the message to every band was like, oh, we need videos because Facebook won't put it in the algorithm unless you do a video. You got to do a video. And it was very like, oh, you know, so it does get a bit like the tail is wagging the dog in terms of now we've got to do things to please the platforms. And it's like, okay, but is that pleasing the fans really, or are you just pleasing the intermediary between them?
I mean, that is a key question, isn't it? And this is something which is, I guess, developed over the lifespan of the company, right? I mean, the last 14 years have been basically, I mean, the advent of, I suppose Instagram was arguably the key thing, but like there was a change. It's 2012, 13.
I mean, we've basically existed through the death of monoculture,
right?
You know, when I started Motive Unknown, the first bands we worked with, it was pretty simple: get on the radio. You know, if you had A-list at Radio 1, that probably guaranteed you a chart, you know, top 5 album. But you had TV, you still had platforms on telly that could be meaningful. You know, Jules Holland was good for sort of the average indie band, but there were still performances on Jonathan Ross and Graham Norton if you were going full pop, you know. Press, you know, be it online when you had whatever.com, you know, enemy.com, this, that, the other. But you still had print media, papers still counted for a lot. So there was all these things where they were definitive tastemakers. And if you were if you got traction in all of those and combined that with good advertising and outdoors, you know, you had that thing in marketing they call the rule of 7, which is like, I've heard the band on the radio, I'm on my way to work, I've seen a poster on the thing, you know, on the tube wall or whatever, you know, that night I'm watching telly and they're the musical guest on whatever show. And it's that's a cumulative thing where someone goes, yeah, I should probably check these guys out. And I think the irony was, in hindsight, I feel like we all rushed to usher in this like disruptive world of social media and, we can all cut these people out and go straight to the audience. But I think the upshot of that is we've actually dispersed it now into a million fragments, and that's made it harder than ever to get attention, because there's now, you know, something I talk about where it's like, it was actually, I don't know if you've seen the guy John Wayne, who's on YouTube a lot, his producer, used to be on Stone's Throw. And he did this whole thing where he's saying you've got a sort of high reach, low value, and then you've got low value, high reach. And his examples of sort of high reach, low value were things like Instagram and Spotify, because on paper you can reach a lot of people, but the value someone attributes to that moment of interaction is actually very low. And then I guess at the other end, the sort of low reach, high value is things like Bandcamp. So it's pretty difficult to reach a lot of people on Bandcamp unless you get coverage in editorial. But the people you reach are prepared to spend, 5, 6, 10, 20 pounds on whatever you're selling. So you can yield good money from that, unlike Spotify and things like that. It's just much, much harder. It was interesting because in his case, he was sort of arguing that YouTube sat somewhere in the middle, in that he felt that people on YouTube were more likely to click through to things like Patreon or Bandcamp and stuff like that. But I think what he missed in his assertion was that he was sort of saying that as somebody who's essentially pivoted to being a creator on YouTube,
Right.
which is not the same as being an artist who just wants to make music. So it's slightly different things.
Yeah, right. I mean, the artist who just wants to make music is that a endangered species? I mean, it's almost like you can't do just music anymore, right? And I mean, that's almost a cliche to say that, and people moan about it so much, it has become a bit of a cliche. But I mean, there is a grain of truth in it, isn't there? Because to achieve breakthrough, to market yourself, to use that a slightly distasteful term, to do that effectively, you can't just stick out music, can you? And it's a slight caricature and a slight misrepresentation to say you ever could, because there were always things you had to do, and there were always things that people had to do to break a record. Yeah. But it is fundamentally different now, isn't it?
I think there's certainly an element to which, I think the music industry can be slightly in denial that actually artists have to do most of the heavy lifting. Even I'm happy to admit that, the bands we work with, you're working with them at a point where they don't need to work so hard to explain who they are. Any of the bands we work with are known, really. And I think there is this awkward truth. It's something there's a guy called Phil Nelson who teaches down at BIM in Brighton. And he's doing a lot of work on this sort of notion of what that period between someone starting to make music and actually getting a record deal that's going to put 50 grand behind their album. That's the sort of grey area. And even we deal mainly with labels and artists who are well above that sort of zone where they're comfortably got reach and can, be addressing audiences. But it is just difficult in that context of I don't think the music industry perhaps likes to admit as much as it should that artists actually have to do most of the heavy lifting. But this is the problem with labels now, and it's why most new labels are folding, because artists are sort of realising that they don't need them. There were three main moats, if you like, that labels offered. One was access to market. So it was like, we've got a distribution deal. We can put you in all of these shops. That's gone out the window because now it's all digital. You can just pay 50 quid, get on TuneCore, DistroKid, whatever, and you're done. Second was access to technology. We'll put you in a studio with this incredible producer. We're prepared to spend an insane amount of money. That's all gone because people can just do a quartet and go, this is where I made my record, a room with a laptop and a pair of speakers. And the third is only a sort of half a point, but it's sort of IP, intellectual property and their ability to exploit that. And even that's going out the window. But really it's the main two, was access to market and access to technology, and they're gone. So now when an artist is talking to a label, they'll be well within their rights to sit there and go, well, if I'm at this point where I'm of interest to you, why do I need you when I can just go and access funding that keeps all the rights for me and just use that instead, which is where companies like AWOL have done or Beatbread or others, where they're just basically funding broadly for artists. I mean, AWOL provide some expertise beyond that, but a lot of it is the funding, just saying, right, here's money to do what you need to do, and give them all the things they need without compromising on handing over rights to anyone. Or not for a long time anyway.
Yeah. So how much is that a problem for art? And when I say art, I mean in the broadest possible way. Like, to what extent were labels important in records as works of art being made? Yeah, I mean,
I've got a big problem with it. I think there's a thing where I think everyone quite enjoys killing stuff. We quite enjoy going, well, we don't need the press anymore.
Yeah.
And there's always someone who had a terrible review. And they're like, yeah, I'm glad they're dead, because they wrote a terrible, all that sort of stuff. But as those things get killed off, you realise that their contribution to arts and culture was actually quite significant. And that's increasingly problematic, I think. Labels are a conduit for many things, but something I think gets missed a lot is that actually through history, they've been a sort of nexus point for scenes in the same way as geography has. You know, name any scene and I can probably put you on a map, like that's where it started.
Okay, you're about 15 minutes into the episode. Well done for sticking around this far. I'm just going to take this opportunity to tell you about how you can support the show. Yeah, for a start, you should have liked this video and subscribed to the channel already. That's something you definitely should have done. Everyone says this, but honestly, it absolutely does help. So if you're enjoying what we're doing, please hit like, please hit subscribe. If you want to get involved more directly, well, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/ScubaOfficial. There are 2 very reasonably priced tiers there. You can get involved with what we do on Hot Flash Recordings, which is my label that I've been running for more than 20 years. And also I do bonus podcasts. Once every 2 weeks, I do a bonus podcast, audio only, where I talk about the industry and what's going on. So if you want to do that, that's great. If not, then like I said, just hit like and subscribe and I'll let you get back to the episode.
And it's a way for people who are not musicians to participate in those scenes, right? And quite often they are just as important as the musicians themselves.
Yeah. And it's also recognizing that these things are galvanized by coming together as a community. So artists never really broke through on their own. You know, if you look at, I don't know, grunge, you know, that was just a bunch of American indie bands in Seattle, but formed around a scene and a sound, and someone stuck a tag on it marked grunge in the same way as we've got.
Signed to Sub Pop, right? So
and then Sub Pop became the grunge label, and then all the majors flood in because there's a scene and they want a bit of that. But you can rinse and repeat that for most genres, you know, dubstep similar, grime similar. You know, there's always people flood in and then it gets pumped full of money, and before you know it, you're Skrillex in the US and it's sort of become EDM, but it's sort of born of dubstep in a weird way. And it's now this huge commercial sort of behemoth, you know. So the need for labels and venues and all these things to be a sort of point of coalescence for a cultural moment is really strong. And I think that's what people are missing now, because someone go, I don't need a label. And it's like, yeah, but you need to bring a bunch of people together under something to give it momentum and mass. And that's not happening now. You know, I really don't think, like I struggle to think what the last big sort of genre-led thing was in North America or Europe. I think there's an argument that South America, there's seen some scenes coming through, being a participant on the world stage, seeing the same
Also
with
Africa.
sort of, I was going to say Nigeria and, you know, Mali and just African music generally. So, yeah, it's difficult. You know, there's, to your point, I think we're, you know, whenever I'm writing about this stuff, it's always like arts and culture will endure and it will keep going. But at the moment, it's never been more under attack from big tech and things that are trying to dictate the status quo. I think it's a really good argument that big tech, by which I mean, you know, Meta, Google, all these people, kind of fear arts and culture, because these are companies not run by cool people. These are run by people that were probably bullied at school. You know, they're all nerds. They're all very damaged.
Right. You sure?
Yeah. Well, you know,
He's scientists, basically.
Well, there's a good interview with good old Nick Clegg, you know, our flip-flopping deputy PM.
I agree with Nick.
And he was saying, you know, people from Silicon Valley are just damaged individuals. You know, they're not very, you know, they're happiest when they're causing chaos and misery. And I just think these people can't bear, you know, what arts and culture is. There's a really good newsletter actually called Garbage Day. And in that, the guy wrote that the biggest enemy of Silicon Valley is young teenage girls, because they are the one thing on the planet that the people of Silicon Valley do not understand and will never understand.
Right. Okay.
And what they think is cool is completely unfathomable to the people of Silicon Valley. They just don't get it.
Okay.
It's why there's such a sort of antipathy towards Taylor Swift and things like that. They just don't like that anyone can have that much sway in a cultural and artistic sense. So it's, you know, it's weird. I know it sounds weird, but I do think it is actually true.
So you're saying it's actually a conscious thing, like with I mean, the antipathy towards arts and culture. Because when you initially said that, I sort of assumed that you were you meant that in a kind of almost a subliminal kind of a way, but you're saying it's actually
yeah, I think it's quite explicit. An open way. Yeah, I think it's an exploitation of this stuff.
Sure.
to enable them to achieve certain objectives. And I think it's a continual process of devaluation of this stuff. Art music now is worth next to nothing, in truth. We've made it so accessible that it has no inherent value because you can just access
recorded
it.
music.
Yes.
Specifically. I think it's important to make that distinction because, the music industry is still, the recorded side has declined as a share of the whole, but the industry itself is, I wouldn't say it's necessary. I wouldn't go as far as say it's healthy, but it's not in terrible shape.
No, on paper, the music industry at the minute looks incredible, but you're at this point where culture has slowed to a halt. We're living in a constant now of people just regenerating stuff. And most of it is catalogue, as in not new music. It's stuff that's technically in the music industry. Catalogue is classed as more than 18 months old. So there's been a lot of irony that even current hits are catalogue technically because they're that much older. But within that, you're seeing, I think there's a real problem now emerging in the music industry where labels, indie and major, are essentially viewing the future of the music industry as a continual process of simply optimizing what's gone before. It's like if we can just find more and more ways to extract value from what we have, we'll be good.
This is so ironic, isn't it? Because, as the costs of making new music have come down, you would assume, you would be forgiven for assuming anyway, that the opposite would be true, right? Because if it's so easy to make music, surely these amazing new great works of art would be constantly being made, which would then be, ripe for exploitation by, the cigar chomping music executive of yore. But it's not true. You're right. You're absolutely right to say that.
Yeah, no, I think there's a certain snobbiness from people like Universal. There's been this them and us because, again, technology has helped musicians create music at a rate that is ridiculous. I read somewhere there was some stat of like more music is released in was it a day or a week than was released in the entirety of like 1993.
Yeah.
That's the sort of output level that we're now at. And I think that's saturated everything and then therefore devalued it, which is, economically, that's always the outcome. If you saturate, supply and demand, there's just an overwhelm of supply, then, demand drops off. And it's
let me just, absolutely, that's true. And clearly technology has enabled that. Isn't the real problem the democratization of distribution there? Because it's actually people have been able to make a record since the advent of the tape recorder, right? Yep. You can strum away on your guitar and technically speaking, that could have been released. Really the issue, really the big change actually is people being able to release independently, properly independently and without these.
That democratization has certainly meant that it's like I said, it's flooded the plane. I remember someone saying, and I don't know if Scott would accept that he'd said it, but Scott Cohen, who started The Orchard, which is now, probably Sony's most valuable company, or owning, if you like, or subsidiary or whatever. He originally, his view was like, if I can just make $1 from every track that we sign, and I sign 5 million tracks, then I'm good. I've got a really good functioning business. And that's a perfectly reasonable assertion, right? That is correct. But it instantly changes this to a scale game of just put as much in the market as possible, because you only need to make pennies off each one, than it is to go, okay, we're going to take this act and work it. And so, I think it is fair to say that the democratization has been a part of it. I don't think it's the lock, stock and barrel argument. I think alongside that is a world in which technology is kind of motivated by Silicon Valley's mentality, which is now, if I've got a tech startup, it's absurd that you would try and win over London, right, and then Greater London, and then the South East, and then the rest of England, and then Scotland, Wales, Ireland. You don't do that. You aim at the entire planet.
You go straight to 10. Yeah, exactly.
Plugging you full of money. You want like 20x returns, and it's like global domination or bust. And that's just not a functioning mentality that's going to be compatible with arts and culture. When you look at the Beggars Group, which is the sort of biggest independent music group, was started by people I mean, Martin Mills wrote a thing for my Network Notes newsletter saying, it started when Jeff Travis started Rough Trade. It was with sort of Marxist principles of decentralizing distribution to break the major label hold. But they weren't doing it with a view of like, right, we're going to do that and then we'll dominate the entire planet and we'll develop 20x returns for a VC. Yeah, they were just trying to build a business.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the only way in which it works is if everyone is an artist. And that is a sort of, that's a viewpoint that many people have, right? And I was just this morning served a clip of Rick Rubin saying that exact thing. And but that is the big tech mentality, isn't it? Anyone can do this. Anyone can be.
Yeah, it's all achievable.
Everyone can have their 15 minutes. And I don't think that's true, remotely true. It's certainly of any value anyway. Maybe everyone has a creative bone somewhere in their body, but that doesn't mean to say that they, everyone should hear whatever their output should be.
Do you know what?
Right?
Like, I was somewhere the other day, Buckingham Palace as it goes, but
okay.
As a tourist, not as an invite. But I was stood in the picture gallery where they've got some of the Royal Collection, and they've got the works by like Rembrandt and Canaletto. I'd never heard of Canaletto, but I was stood in front of this Canaletto picture and it took my breath away. It's just one of the most stunning things I've ever seen. And if you can look them up, go and look them up and you'll see what I mean. They're just absolutely exquisite. But the idea that someone can, anyone can be an artist, not like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That is a level of talent above and beyond the normal person. And it's the same, there's many a producer where it's just like, we're not all the same. Everyone can't be Mad Lib. You can't all be this guy, that guy. It just,
sure.
Can you bang out a beat? Yeah. It might be a beat, but, you can bang one out, but...
Stick it on Spotify. So this is, so I had this written down. Return to elitism, ?
I don't think it's return to elitism. I think I think in the context of this, it's actually returning to finding experiences with art and culture that are substantially more deep and meaningful than they are at the moment. Like I watched a clip the other day of one of the Fantasia orbital raves from about 92. And all of the comments below it, it's shot about 7 a.m. There's a lot of people on the pills, a lot of gurning, a lot of sweating, a lot of people looking a bit ropey.
The worst for wear.
Yeah, after a solid 12 hours on the go. But everyone's just going, look, they're dancing together and there's not a phone in sight and no one's trying to sit there and be like, oh, capture the moment for the media. They're just in the now. And I don't want to sound like a sort of wellness coach, but, that mindfulness thing of like being in the moment in the club is kind of being put to the sword because everyone, when they're in the moment, is going, oh, I need to share this moment with my followers and all these things. But it's, it diminishes the depth and the enrichment of these experiences people can have. And so I think it is this thing of like, I wouldn't say it's elitism. I would say it's, it's finding the things that truly impact on a level that you may never have known about and give you that kind of, road to Damascus moment where you're just like, oh my God. And I think people of a certain age know exactly what I'm talking about because they were in the club when that song dropped and it was just this thing. And they weren't surrounded by heads with phones being all like, I've got this for the gram and all stuff like that. And I know that, someone's going to look at this and go, look at this. He's got a grey beard. He's clearly old. He's giving it the sort of old man shouting at clouds vibes. I'll accept that. But I honestly have hit a point now where I feel like everyone's being subjugated by devices. We're all reliant on these platforms that are all led by people at Silicon Valley. And, there's definitely a Silicon Valley sort of cultish mentality, the Peter Thiels of the world, the Andreessen Horowitz kind of axis, all that stuff. And they've got an agenda for sort of techno-utopianism where it looks like a scene from Black Mirror. It's not good and it's not in line with the beauty of arts and culture. And so I think when people are kind of experiencing these things through Instagram and through kind of bite-sized content and all that stuff, they're getting no depth of connection with something. And I think that's quite sad. And that's what is the area that needs to change. And I think it's what you're seeing now where, things like Spotify, they're ticking the convenience box. But I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that millennials accepted Spotify and they've gone, yeah, this is great. Gen Z, the generation after that, are not happy with Spotify and they're not adopting it. And that demographic's really not picking up on those platforms because people are a bit just like, yeah, this is just kind of, it's a bit rubbish. It's just a ton of everything and it doesn't give me an experience of anything.
I mean, okay. I actually think that, Spotify is an excellent product, actually.
Really?
I mean, I use it all the time.
I'm surprised.
I mean, putting to one side, having my own music up there, just as someone who listens to, I generally speaking, don't listen to dance music.
Right.
I listen to, for the most part, classic rock, to be honest. And for that purpose, it's extremely good. Putting the sound quality to one side, that's just something we'll come back to. But I mean, I think that the reason that Gen Zs might not like it may have more to do with the fact that you have to listen to whole songs on there and it's not just 15 seconds or whatever bits you get on TikTok. I don't know. That's a negative way of looking at it. But I mean, I see streaming and the streaming, certainly just from the product perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's quite good. From someone who just listens to music, as I said, I think it's decent. As mentioned before, I detect a bigger issue in terms of the way it's talked about, in terms of the way people get paid and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's more to do with, in my opinion, distribution and access to these platforms rather than the platforms themselves. And of course, the platforms, it suits the platforms to have everything up there. So it's not, you can't completely divorce the two. But I think that there's a tendency to, just say Spotify bad, Spotify evil.
Yeah.
And that's that's what scratches the itch of the kind of dissatisfaction with the wider situation in arts and culture, which you've, talked about. And there's a sort of platitudinous way of, seeming to deal with it without really dealing with it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't particularly like Spotify, and it's funny because I don't like it because I think it's a bad product. So I'm the opposite to you.
Yeah. What's bad about it as a product?
I mean, I hate that I can never find my music. I mean, I don't use it anymore. I cancelled it.
Oh, yeah.
So you'd have a library of music, and when you open the thing up, it's like, do you want a podcast? And I'm like, no. Do you want some videos? No. Okay. Do you want one of our playlists? No, I don't. I just want to find my music and play it, please. And then their algorithms, I think, are actually pretty awful. We tested this. We did a playlist once when we were doing some work with Trojan Records, an amazing playlist of deep cuts.
We talked about this last time, didn't we?
On a Virgin account. Yeah. And then, so no other algorithmic learning, and played the out of it. And it basically just was like, yeah, have you heard of Bob Marley? And you're just like, wow, really? That's paper thin. It's like you playing the Arctic Monkeys and you're going, have you heard of a band called the Beatles? And you're just like, right. Shoot me now. So I don't like that. And then also the audio quality is observably sort of inferior to all the others. So I use Qobuz. Partly, I'll admit, because they approached me and said, do you want to trial it for free? And I was like, obviously, yeah, so gave that a go. But they stream in like 24-bit, 96 kilohertz. And even on a pair of Samsung Galaxy Buds that I use, it is substantially better quality, well-recorded stuff, because that's, again, the caveat, poorly recorded, probably wouldn't sound any different. Go and listen to Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack, where the strings are recorded in Abbey Road in the same room that everyone does their soundtracks in. Unbelievable, absolutely incredible. So, it on every level to me, it's kind of weak sauce compared to alternatives, Apple Music or whatever. But that's the product. I don't inherently have an issue with streaming. And I think the thing we have to admit is, broadly, Joe Public has no issue at all with streaming. So I can sit here and go,
it's really successful.
I don't like it. Yeah. But, there's a million people who queue up and be like, are you out of your tiny mind? This is totally fine. And I get that, but I think there needs to be at points more friction involved, and there needs to be more of a sense of maybe reward in effort. Because listening to music used to be a high friction thing, or discovering music. You'd go and hang out in a record shop, hope the geezer behind the counter was cool, might tap you up some stuff, have some things under the counter, all these things that the path to get to it was pretty complicated. Now it's just all there. Yeah. And there is no Ironically, there's so much of it that it's gone the other way. It's like, can I find it among the other 100,000 tracks that went up today? And that's probably the bigger challenge. But yeah, maybe there needs to be more friction within it. And I think there needs to be better ways for this to turn into meaningful money, because I think it does broadly serve the Ed Sheerans and Taylor Swifts of the world, who get paid the lion's share of the money, but does not serve the sort of, the working class artists, the people that have, got a label, signed, whatever, putting stuff out, might be DJing, might be touring, but probably have some sort of day job to shore up the income as well. They're not well served by streaming at all.
No, there are alternative methods for them to use, though, to communicate with their fans. And when you're at that level, you almost by definition are closer to your fans. Right? There's small numbers of them. They're coming to your shows are smaller. There's more opportunity for you to sort of interact with them directly. If you're doing shows and if you're keeping it local. I mean, that's, I do see this with a lot of people. It's like they're trying to address the planet. And it goes back to that thing of like, I wish people would understand that they've got more to gain by contributing to a local scene and building that up than just sort of going, hey world, I've got a new song out, Right. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, the title of this was supposed to be "When Will Change Come?" Title of this talk. I mean, we haven't mentioned that you've alluded to this, but you haven't mentioned that you write a Substack called Network Notes, and this is a theme of a recent piece of yours.
Yeah.
What is change? What does it look like? How can it be enduring? I mean, is it anything more than just the sort of lower middle class of artists get paid more? I mean, the pushback to that, I mean, as you were saying, as you brought up, I mean, the big change that streaming has brought, one of the big changes that streaming has brought, is the fact that there are just so many more artists. Because I mean, as does discussed, like it's anyone can release something, which means that there are just exponentially more people. I think I crunched the numbers on this in a sort of back of the envelope kind of a way a while back, and it was something like there's at least 10 times as many people trying to make a living from music versus 99 when Napster came out.
Oh god.
So that in itself suggests some unsustainable nature to the business, or certainly if that's the aspiration, there is some kind of like
I do wonder if there's a chunk of that sort of demographic of people making music is just men in their 40s who want a hobby and are settling into stuff.
You're talking about that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like basically a bit more disposable income, quite happy to spend X amount on some plugins and fanny about in Ableton Live.
I'm sure lots of people are.
Yeah, so I think there's
but also men in their 20s as well, and probably some women as well, but
Yeah, sorry to keep it men only. Yeah, but anybody really. But I just think, we always talk about music in the context of the young, and I think it's probably a lot of people making music that are older,
I'm sure,
and the convenience of just being able to sit at a laptop, between times, maybe their kids are sort of out of the running around and completely swallowing all your attention, and life's settled down a bit, and it's just their outlet.
Yeah.
So I think that's possibly part of it, but anyway, I feel like I interrupted you there.
No. I mean, at a general level, because I mean, the piece in question, it's just asking the question.
Yeah.
And you kind of you touch on there's various little bits of innovation in the D2C model of stuff like Nina Protocol and various things happening. There's kind of like things happening around the edges.
Yeah.
Right. And it feels like sort of window dressing and people are sort of chipping away, but there's no, it doesn't seem like there's a big looming fundamental change on the horizon. It almost feels like streaming or the current mix of products and services that make up the industry is almost like the final thing, but surely that can't be the case. So I don't know, what are your general big picture, blue sky thinking thoughts on this, Darren?
Oh God. I mean, I think there's growing dissatisfaction with streaming. And these things, they don't come with a bang. They come with a sort of whisper to start with. People just are quietly getting fed up with these platforms. And for Spotify particularly, it's sort of getting oddly cumulative, whether it's the product or whether it's his investment, Daniel Ek's investment into sort of AI defense tech and stuff like that, that people are sort of taking issue with. But, there's increasingly a sense of dissatisfaction. But whenever dissatisfaction arrives about something, it presents opportunities for somebody else to create solutions that speak to that level of dissatisfaction.
Yep.
So whatever those grievances that people are having, could be addressed by a new product. So I think that's where change will be coming from, is people trying to find these solutions. And, you are seeing it with things like Nina, and there's this Subvert, which is sort of like a cooperative version of Bandcamp, which I'd like to see it do well, but I feel like historically anything run cooperatively tends not to do that well, because it sort of can collapse under its own bureaucracy. I hope it doesn't, and I wish Subvert well, so I'm not being down on them. It's an observation objectively that history's shown those things don't necessarily come through too well. But I think, beyond that, it's, potentially an argument that these, the next things that come won't be basing themselves on a mindset that we've had for probably 15 years now, which is like, I've got an idea, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to find a VC who's going to lend me £1 million to get it off the ground.
Right.
And pump me full of money.
Okay.
With an expectation of 10x growth and a global domination strategy and all
Yes.
that. I think the next things that come, ideally, if they succeed, will ideally, again, reject that model and will focus on alternative ways to court people that may be more qualitative. Because I genuinely feel like history is just a pendulum swinging backwards and forwards. You see it in the wider world, like the minute you're seeing the rise of right-wing politics and far-right politics. And unfortunately, I think that will continue, bleak as that is to say. But these things always go so far and then they swing back the other way. And I think we're probably having a similar thing where the arc is sort of peaking for the convenience of streaming and the fact that it's just everything for a fixed price and all this sort of stuff. And I think people will start wanting a bit more than that. And they'll be prepared to pay for that. And there'll be things that might allow that and allow people to make more money beyond these things. But it needs a mindset shift as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a key point, right? Because, what we're talking about is fundamentally people making more money, right?
Yeah.
And that money's got to come from somewhere. Yeah. And are music fans going to be prepared to pay a premium for something which is more meaningful, in big quotation marks, whatever that means to anyone, right? And I've talked about this in the context of small clubs closing, small venues closing down, also with private equity funds, one private equity fund in particular taking over festivals, for example, and also live, obviously the continuing dominance of Live Nation. The question is, are people prepared to pay a premium for stuff which is not in this paradigm? Right, and that's a big, big question.
It is, and it essentially boils down to friction, right? It's like, at what point are they going to be so fed up with it that they'll go, I've had enough? It's the same as you pay for streaming services and they'll quietly ratchet the price up. You pay rent on offices, they'll quietly ratchet the price up. You pay for anything. Yeah. And it's like, what's the elasticity on pricing that you can keep nudging up? It's like Amazon do at the minute. I was trying to watch something on Amazon Prime last night. I keep putting frigging ads in it.
I know, yeah.
And I'm like, I pay for Prime. Like, I don't want ads because...
Chris Rock advertising a casino.
Yeah, and it's just like, God, is this what it's become?
Yeah.
But it's like, how far will that go before I hit that point of going, do you know what? Right, screw this.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm just going to not give them my money. And that's probably the tipping point that will come. Will it come soon? I don't know. Like, this could run like this for another 10 years.
Totally. But also the question is, like, where does that money go? Right? Because this is sort of the problem I have, or part of the problem I have with people saying, well, I'm going to boycott Spotify. I'm going to Well, if you don't put that money somewhere else that's going to artists, that doesn't help anyone, right? No. And as mentioned, there really needs to be more money more money coming from fans.
Yeah.
Who are already under pressure due to cost of living and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
this is a very difficult circle to square, I think. But the search for meaning and the need for a better relationship with arts and culture may lead to the kind of thing we're talking about. But it's so difficult to see how that materializes. And of course, things are big changes are rarely predictable.
Yeah.
So it will,
Well, I've kind of remarked before now that, I'm old enough that I was around in the music industry in 1999 when it collapsed.
Yeah.
And if you read, and I recommend it, Eamon Ford's book, 1999, the whole theme in that is really one of hubris, of arrogance, that the majors in particular were sat there being like, yeah, we're just in the clover here. We'll put a record out. We'll reissue the thing on CD that we put out on vinyl in the 70s.
Selling for 15 quid a pop. Right?
Yeah, sell them at £15 and they cost pennies to make. Then we'll do a special edition 4 months later and we'll sell that for 17 quid, even though it's the same product with 3 more songs. And we'll do all of these things. And then one day, rug gets pulled and they're blindsided, sort of. I don't think they were blindsided to the extent that everyone likes to think, but they weren't equipped for change. And that arrogance has never been more present than it is now. Everyone is sat there just being, let's just go, we're just making loads of money. And now we've got to do it's the same, everyone talking about super fans. It's how can we juice more money out of these people? Just as in the late 90s, they were like, all right, we'll just keep rolling out deluxe versions. And, I did it the other day, a mate messaged me, I'm a fan of Black Sabbath. I was at the final show and all that. And now they've just announced a sort of €500 version of Master of Reality, I think. And it's just a double album, but like a handmade sleeve. And it's one of these really, that stupid vinyl that's got liquid in it.
Right.
And all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine. And we were sort of, me and friends were talking about it. And I was like, to me, it's just repulsive because you're not even getting good music. Like there's a super deluxe box set of that thing that actually is pretty good. It's got a load of rare stuff to listen to. And that's the product at the end of the day is the music, right? This £500 thing is just like posh packaging. And there's only 500 being made and your name will get stamped on it. So you can kind of wave it around and feel special. But you haven't got anything that I haven't got already because inside it is just the same record that I can stream on Qobuz, ironically in better quality, arguably, than you got on the vinyl. Right. So, but there are products for people, and these things will undoubtedly sell because there will be somebody who's got plenty of money for whom 500 quid, big Sabbath fan, they're probably a millionaire, and they're just like, yeah, I'll buy that. And they'll snap that up. So we're in this phase of that trying to juice everyone for as much as they can. And I think that's something that everyone needs to be very mindful of because it's the point at which you hit maximum arrogance that you are totally blind to what's going on around you in the wider sense. And it's when you're most open to get completely roundhoused out of the picture, as happened at the turn of the century.
Before you know it, you're Lars Ulrich suing your own fans.
Yeah. You're in that space and you look like the enemy again. So, and that's the thing is that, if people, whenever I'm talking to them, I go, all right, well, what's that going to be? And it's like, well, I don't know, because if I knew, I'd probably have tried to do it, right? And led that charge. But, the dissatisfaction is there. And I think there is an increased hunger for something different. And what that will be remains to be seen. But as I said, I just wonder if there will be a point where it will be a slight, like I said, pendulum coming back of people maybe being disaffected with their relationship with technology, putting more value in being together. And you see this in a sort of, look at the Oasis reunions, right? Mm. Everyone was paying loads of money, and Oasis fairly shamelessly were just like, yeah, I mean, if we can take you for 300 quid, we're gonna.
I mean, honestly, their claim to not to know about dynamic pricing is one of the most far-fetched things I've ever.
No, absolutely not. I did laugh. Was it Robert Smith from The Cure? It was just like, any artist that says they didn't know, they're just lying and they're throwing the manager under the bus. Now, we don't know. So I suppose for legal reasons, it's like, maybe we can't prove that, but I don't know. But they were getting as much from it. And in a way, I don't hate that because, there's always a point where an artist goes, you know what, I've earned the right to just, because they're going to cash out, right? They're just going to do these tours. Then Noel will almost certainly sell his catalogue to someone like Hypnosis for about 500 million quid, having pushed the value of it sky high, and he'll take the money and run. And that's a perfectly smart business strategy. You can't hate anyone for doing that. Mm. But it's interesting that everyone was, first of all, prepared to pay an absurd amount of money. And second of all, that the biggest zeitgeist of 2025 is probably the Oasis tour.
Yeah, and no one regrets paying that money.
No, but
And they
it's
probably in hindsight would have paid more, like, you know.
yeah, but it's so everyone can put on a bucket out and a bloody anorak and then walk around and pretend like it's the era of Britpop again. It's entirely nostalgic. And, you know, I've read a few articles now. There seems to be a sort of thing going on at the minute of everyone going, what was the hit of the summer in 2025? And the point being, it kind of wasn't one.
It was, it was cigarettes and alcohol with the video, people doing the podcast.
You know, something like that. But it's, you know, it's sort of grist to the mill for my point that, first of all, people are prepared to pay for great experiences that bring everyone together. And everyone I know that went to those shows, I didn't go. I'm not a fan, but everyone.
Neither am I, but honestly, I wish I'd got a ticket.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, in a weird way, I kind of wish I'd gone because it was the moment of everyone being in the stadiums, and everyone I know that went said, a couple of mates said it was hilarious. You couldn't hear the band because everyone was singing along so loudly that the band might as well just have put on a record and walked off stage.
But Beatlemania all over again.
Yeah, but that moment, that's what everyone was really experiencing.
Yep.
And I understand the value of that. So it doesn't matter who the band is. That moment is what you pay for. So people will pay for those things, but there is no current equivalent of that.
Yeah.
There's no Oasis that people are going to...
Okay, well, this brings us to K-pop.
Yeah.
Because if there is an equivalent, it is that. I mean, it doesn't really happen quite so much in Europe. I think some of the bands translate. I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination, but some of the bands I think translate to the US. I mean, some of them are big here too. Yeah. But those experiences, well, the experiences those people have with that music and with that scene, does seem to be equivalent. Right. And if there is something happening in the global music industry, which, you know, approximates the kind of, you know, whichever golden era you want to point to, whether it's, you know, 90s, 80s, whatever, that's a thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would argue it's very much the manufactured thing. You know, the bands are all put together and trained and, you know, so it's, you know, the sort of update on Take That and Boyzone, arguably, which it has a place. I'm not, you know, you can't, on these things, they've all got purpose and value, but don't pretend like you're going to get the next Joni Mitchell from K-pop necessarily.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, does that matter though? Isn't it about people's experiences, right?
It's different levels and layers, right?
To play devil's advocate completely, isn't it just about the experiences that people have in the crowd and with the music? Like, does it matter that it's, you know, manufactured to the extent that it is? And I think, yeah.
I mean, that's probably an argument that's as old as time, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's when like the Monkees were put together as the sort of prefab version of the Fab Four, you know, so that's been happening since popular music arrived. So, you know, I think it's a slightly different thing. You know, these things are doing well, but I think in terms of the other elements of arts and culture, maybe less so. So to your point, absolutely K-pop's doing, you know, it's a formidable business that's now, you know, probably making Europe's music industry look a bit coming up short, right? Because someone sort of said to me that they thought that the last act that Universal competently broke was Sam Smith, and that was well over 10 years ago.
Right.
And they've struggled since then to break any act from the UK on a global stage. And in the meantime, K-pop is sort of, I mean, again, it's sort of that arrogance thing in a weird way. They came out of nowhere, you know, and have suddenly swallowed the globe with BTS and stuff like that. So, that, you know, it's a highly successful story, and fair play to them in the same way as, you know, seeing it with Bad Bunny and other artists that are not from North America and Europe who are doing ridiculous business, you know, and again, fair play to them. But I don't know that those all they're not the lock, stock and barrel counter argument.
Sure.
You know, it's like, K-pop for, you know, manufactured pop is the current apex point in the same way as, I don't know, New Kids on the Block were in the 80s and Take That were in the 90s or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure to the extent that they're direct equivalents. I mean, yes, absolutely, they look the same musically, and they're put together by, you know, management companies and the rest of it in similar ways. I think the relationship that the fans have, I mean, again, with the caveat that I'm by no means an expert in this, I think the relationship that the fans have with not just the music, but the experience, to use that term, in its totality is a bit different, I think. But, you know, like I said, I'm not an expert, so let's not go into this.
Yeah, maybe it's just a confluence of culture as well. You know, I think it's certainly that teen manufactured pop thing always had, exponentially higher levels of fandom because of the target audience being young girls and stuff like that. And I think they've layered onto that really great elements of, probably Southeast Asian pop culture and all these other things. Yep. And it makes for a very heady combination. And like I said, I want to be clear when I'm sitting here being critical of the wider picture, I'm not actually shitting on people doing what they do at the minute. I mean, someone commented to me the other day that they felt like indie labels should have in the last 10 years have seized on a moment to make more of their situation than they did. Maybe they could have taken back means of distribution that bit more. Maybe they could have looked at their own platforms to launch on those things. And, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But they didn't. And in the same way as if somebody's saying now that labels are just optimizing and sort of generally trying to get more from what they've got, I don't blame them for that. Because of course you would. You're running a business. You've got people to pay. You've got to keep your future preserved. Why wouldn't you do that? And I think, if I've got a criticism sometimes, it's perhaps that, particularly on the indie side, but, maybe also amongst artists, there's just a bit too much sort of selfishness where people just go, well, I'm all right.
Right.
And you're seeing this now where, we've seen it in the debate about festivals. Is it Sean Ronaldo, I think, on First Floor has been writing a lot about sort of scab artists. If artist one pulls out of this festival because of the involvement of KKR and then artist two jumps in to take the slot, are they sort of a scab, which I think is strong words.
I'm grinning because I am one of those artists.
In which side? You pulled out or you stepped in?
No, I stepped in.
Okay.
As I've talked about this on mostly on our Patreon feed, actually. But I frankly would do it again under the circumstances. I think that the circumstances have changed a bit since the festival in question happened, which was Field Day.
Yeah.
I think that, it's like you say, strong stuff in the terms in which it's been argued. And I think there are multiple dimensions to the kind of the activism that's going on around that particular thing. And when I talked about the quote unquote private equity firm in question earlier, I was of course referring to KKR. It's an interesting one for sure.
Look, you know what? It's complicated. Like I was at Great Escape 2 years ago when there was a lot of boycotting there because of Barclays' involvement, who were bankrolling things about bombing Palestine and so on. And within that, I remember writing a Network Notes from there and was just saying, it's just kind of sad because you've just got all these new bands, which is really what Great Escape's primarily for, who just want to turn up and play everyone their music. And now they're all getting judged for something that they really have got little to no control over. They didn't choose to, I imagine most of these bands are clueless as to who the people are, and it just, we're in a world of highly polarized views and it's like, oh, you're right and I'm wrong or vice versa. And there's no kind of, people have a little truck for the bit in the middle. It's just like, it's complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
Difficult.
And there's a tendency to want to simplify and then use it as a sort of as a way of berating other people, seemingly for the sake of doing it. It's interesting actually the private equity thing, because it is so ubiquitous in the industry now. When you mentioned the possibility of Noel selling his catalog probably to a private equity fund. And of course, there's the Superstruck thing, which is owned by KKR, who seemingly own every festival. There's the involvement of BlackRock and others in various different catalog deals. You wrote a piece recently about indie label owners aging out and what might potentially happen with the indie sector as a result of those things happening. Like the spectre of private equity with regards to that situation developing, I have to say, fills me with a degree of trepidation. Let's talk about that. What was the piece in question is an interesting one, I have to say.
It was based on sort of knowing that people are tapping these people up, but I'm not prepared to say who and where.
Okay.
But, you look round and there are a lot of very large indie labels where they don't have a succession plan in the sense that basically they don't have kids prepared to take over the business, or they've got kids and they're not prepared to be involved because they're just not interested, which is fine. But yeah, I mean, they're hitting a point. There is a definite generational thing there where there are a number of long-standing, legendary indie labels that, will be looking to exit. And I've been sort of clear to state when I've been writing about it that if I was them, I'd be looking to exit, because now's the perfect time to exit.
Yeah.
The value of catalogue has probably never been higher. So if you're sitting on tons of great records as an asset class of investment, if we're boiling it down to that, if I was a billionaire investor, you'd be looking at it going,
absolutely. I mean, the other thing is that there is an unprecedented amount of liquidity out there looking for assets to invest in. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just,
so it's, I think they will all wind up getting sold. But somebody commented when I was writing that piece, someone commented going, yeah, but like Motown was an indie and that got sold. Def Jam was an indie, that got sold. So is it not just a part of life, really, that these things just become part of majors? And I think that is a fair comment. I think actually the main thrust of my piece that a lot of people missed was not that these labels will age out and sell up and move on. It's that there isn't a new breed of labels coming through.
I was going to make that point, yeah.
Yeah, and there's not a next generation. Like, who are the next, take your pick of, current labels that have been around a long time. There aren't, I'd sort of, maybe Hyperdub are one that have come through in the last, I guess, 20 years. I don't know. I'd have to ask Marcus how long they've been going, because I can't.
No, they have been going for 20 years. Yeah, just over. Yeah.
But they're probably the last label I can think of. I'm sure there will be others that people go, yeah, but, who've built a very credible set of things. But I mean, even Hyperdub are probably not,
I don't think they've got a catalogue which is...
No, I mean,
a few things in there, but
You get a lot of indies where they've got a very bankable...
Yeah.
Domino have got the Arctic Monkeys. Dirty Hit have got the 1975. Can't think of people like Ninja Tune have got Warp, have got things like Aphex Twin, but also things like Nightmares on Wax and things like that actually stream massively now. So there's a lot of these labels have got either one big kind of mega act, or they've got a long tail of very bankable things.
Yeah.
I just don't know that we're seeing labels come through that exhibit those traits. But
well, if labels are no longer necessary...
Yeah.
Then why would they?
Maybe the change. Yeah, and that's something we'll have to wait and see, but it sort of circles back to the start of I would like labels to exist as a conduit for a scene and a sound, because I think whilst there's very much a lot of labels that became very eclectic, you look at someone like Warp or Ninja Tune, that, which sort of aligns in my demographic, I guess, when I was DJing and doing whatever. They both had certain types of sound. Warp had a sort of IDM thing going on with Oteka and Aphex and all that. Ninja had more of a sort of chill beats thing going on, with DJ Food and, all the Funky Pulsini and all those kinds of people that were around at the time. And they sort of started in those areas, and then as they got bigger, they sort of broadened out and did a wider range of stuff. But they were all built off the back of specific scenes and sounds. Warp with Sheffield, Ninja more London, but Hoxton Square and, it's Club Night at the Blue Note and all that. And I just, I kind of worry for what comes now that brings scenes together, because I think it's that togetherness that I worry about the most. I mean, I was listening to in 1975, their last live album, and there's a moment in that when Matty, the singer, sort of gives this speech about, as a band, they only work because they're friends for life and have been from day one. And he's like, I would be an absolute wreck if I didn't have these people. There's no way I'd be famous. I'd just be probably a drunk wash up somewhere, but I wouldn't be what I am. And he was kind of saying to the crowd, you all spend too much time on Instagram being in your own little bubble. And he's like, you need to, you form these bonds with other people that mean you're a team, and it's you're a clan prepared to take on the world sort of thing, and you're making stuff happen. But I would extend that out beyond that of but then you need your band or your act to be with other acts and finding its space. And then the label becomes a conduit from that. But we're not seeing it at the minute. It's not there. It's not happening.
Yeah. Okay. Totally agree. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the role of journalism and criticism, and what that the role which was previously large has declined. Actually, you mentioned Sean Ronaldo. His piece today was about this and kind of an interesting
I read it on the way
take
in.
on it. Yeah. So, talk about how this might potentially develop in this new golden age that we're talking about, which may or may not emerge.
I do wonder if people are just, you're seeing, I think Sean's right to identify that there's a different type of critic emerging, and there's sort of people doing Instagram stuff and whatever, sort of social media based things. And I think that's right. And I think it's interesting. I worry the degree to which it has depth sometimes, but at the same time, you get people like Fantano and all those guys, Derek G, who'll be on YouTube and be talking about music at length. So I think there's sort of something for everyone. If you want the quick bite-sized, buy this, it's great, with no sort of backing that up with anything, or you get a 10-minute breakdown of why this thing's great. I mean, even people like Rick Beato, whilst he's backward looking for the most part because he's an older guy and he's sort of talking about the music of his era, which is sort of 90s rock and maybe then the classics beyond that and whatever, I think they have led a real charge of appreciation for the stories around music. And that's the thing I think is the most underexploited element of music at the minute.
Right.
Like, I used to do a radio show with my mate Wrong Tom, who used to be on True Thoughts and Big Dada and stuff, did an album of Roots Maneuver. And he's a real musicologist, he loves the stories. And it was something we really enjoyed about our show. And what other people, I think, took to was we weren't just going, here's a song and putting it on. We were talking about the weird histories behind it. I mean, Tom at one point was playing something from Z Records that had like Kid Creole and the Coconuts and stuff, but was relaying this fantastical tale about it's got some connection to the Mothercare kids brand. Right. And it was like the guy that started Z, I think his parents had funded Mothercare or something, but there was this like insanely unlikely link.
Okay.
And it was so unlikely that I think Lauren Laverne invited him on to Six Music to sort of do a special and talk about it. But it's that sort of thing of the wider picture of these stories that has been largely put to the sword in the last 10 years of just the depth and the context. So I like that you get in people like Derek G that will just sit there and talk about why he likes a record in pretty mellow terms. And, but I also can appreciate that, if you're getting little quick bite-sized stuff that's going, this is why it's good, all power to them. I think probably what needs to come together beyond that is a means for the music industry to recognise that it should probably be courting these people and get into that world that we used to have of, press people trying to chat up the critic at The Guardian or wherever to get some coverage because, it was important. And it's the only way to cut through. And now we need cut through more than ever. And I think I think serious music fans have probably have a healthy skepticism of algorithms to be a sole source of like, oh, you've played this, so you should hear that. Yeah. And I think that's where these kinds of, the new breed of critics are sort of filling that gap of like a bit more context, a bit more history.
Yeah, it's the way things fit together, isn't it? And that's what makes... oftentimes music which is it's great and you're into it and it's like, but it doesn't have like you say, it doesn't have a context. But when it acquires that, suddenly it's just like, okay, that's why. And it gives it more, I think, depth of understanding and depth of enjoyment sometimes.
I think we like attaching things to songs. It's like the reason you get songs like Kate Bush's Running Up a Hill moment from Stranger Things, because I think people quite vividly just attach the drama of those moments in the show to that song, and that empowers the song more to affect you and give you that depth of how it really hits, And I think it's the same when you provide these sort of wider levels of context about this stuff that allows people to feel more invested into it and feel more connected. And that's sort of, I think, broadly what people are rediscovering that depth of connection, and I hope they continue to, because that's the stuff that leads down that path of like realizing what these moments truly are, and are not superficial and they're not transient. They're highly impactful and can stay with you for life. I've no doubt I've got everyone watching, listening to this will have moments from, if you're old like me, and less old like you, but from 20 years ago, whatever, when you like had your moment in a club, it was just like, oh my God, this, it will never get better than this.
So I can give you an example. I went to see Smashing Pumpkins recently.
Yep.
In their London show. And I first saw Pumpkins on the Siamese Dream Tour in 1994. I was 15 with a head full of acid.
Yeah.
At the Astoria in London. And I hadn't seen, I also saw them on the Melancholy Tour a couple of years later. But yeah, standing in the field at Gunnersbury Park, I cried like a baby. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. It was like, it's amazing.
Yeah,
and it brought those two things back, but also gave me something new.
Yeah, but I think it is that thing. And like I said, I don't want to sound like that kind of old hippie, but it is, being there in that moment and enjoying that moment and realizing the depth of connection those things can bring. And it is funny because I was talking about this with somebody else saying how, like, my son's just turned 19. He doesn't drink. A good number of his friends don't drink. Among that generation, there's a lot less alcohol consumption. And from a health perspective, that's probably good. But I was chatting to another friend of mine who's also got kids, and we were sort of saying, what's the cost though? In like, how many nights have you had where you were just and chatting to some random guy or girl or whatever, and it gave you this incredible moment because your social sort of barriers were down because you were drunk, or from the pills generation, same deal, suddenly all geezers that were giving it the alpha male nonsense in a pub and having a fight were all hugging and leaving the club arm in arm because they were full of E. The depth that brings is sort of an additional layer. And this is not me sort of advocating that we should all go out and drink and drug ourselves senseless, but there's definitely, I think, an awkward truth that some of those things added to these experiences that made them so much more memorable. And I think as people are becoming more sort of healthy and, clean and serene, I mean, maybe they don't enjoy things to the same depth. I don't know. There'll probably be someone on YouTube commenting going, how dare you? I've never drunk. I've had, religious experiences at this gig and that gig, and all power to you if you have. But it's just an observation. But yeah, I do worry that people don't have that depth of experience of what music can really be, and I think its ability to move you is so massive and profound that if your only experience of music is coming through devices and things like that, you haven't got halfway there, in my view. There's so much more to get from this. And maybe that's where the future lies, is in this world where people reconnect with just how phenomenal and profound and affecting music can be, and really lean into that. And perhaps, these critics, the new breed of critics that are coming through, maybe they're just another signal of the way to go with this stuff. And, I'm all for that.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Darren, this has been great. Thanks for coming on the show again, man.
Thanks for having me back, mate.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.